As we already know, the Carolina Panthers have made the decision to bench former #1 overall pick Bryce Young in favor of Andy Dalton. And I've been listening to a lot of people in the national media talk about this decision. And a lot of people are throwing a pity party for Bryce Young. They are saying that he didn't deserve this. He needed more time to develop. Let me tell you guys something. Especially if you're Shannon Sharp or Chad Ochocinco when you're watching this. It's easy when you're on the outside looking in to say that this was the wrong decision. But if you're Adam Thielen and you're Deontay Johnson and you're constantly giving your all every single play, you're wide open several times and Bryce Young just doesn't see you or he just overthrows you by a mile, are you telling me that you're not going to get frustrated? Bryce Young got drafted into a horrible situation. We can all agree with that. When you get drafted #1 overall, however, you are expected to overcome situations like this. As messed up as it seems, #1 overall picks have to be able to elevate the situation that they're in. Nobody that gets drafted this high gets drafted into a completely great situation where they have it all. You got to be able to overcompensate for something. Joe Burrow, when he got drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals, in year 2, he took them to the Super Bowl. Yes, they did have great receivers, but that was one of the worst offensive lines in the modern Super Bowl era to ever make it to a championship game. Joe Burrow was able to win despite having a bad offensive line. Cam Newton was the heart and soul of the Carolina Panthers. He took them to the Super Bowl with Ted Ginn being his best wide receiver one year and won MVP that same season. Andrew Luck carried the Indianapolis Colts with T.Y. Hilton being his best receiver, not having a good run game, and always having a bad offensive line. When you are a first overall pick and you get drafted into situations like these, you can't expect to have it all. You have to be able to overcome limitations. And I know hindsight is 2020. It's easy right now to say that C.J. Stroud should have been the Carolina Panthers selection with that draft pick, considering everything that they gave up. But looking back upon it, it was the right decision. You know, in the sense of Bryce Young, when you think about what he did at Alabama, he was able to produce some incredible numbers despite those Alabama teams not being as talented as what they've been in years past. However, Frank Wright, the head coach at the time when they drafted Bryce Young, never wanted this dude. He wanted C.J. Stroud. You see, back then, I thought that it was 1A, 1B. The Panthers couldn't go wrong taking either Bryce or C.J. Stroud. But really, with Bryce Young being so small in size, having his own limitations, he was never going to be able to overcome the dysfunction that he was walking into with this Panthers organization. C.J. Stroud is wired differently as a player and just mentally to where he could have elevated Carolina. C.J. Stroud has had the greatest rookie season that we've ever seen in the history of this league. He would have been a better fit for the current state of the Carolina Panthers than what Bryce Young is, because C.J. Stroud doesn't have size limitations. And with C.J. Stroud's mentality, he's just a dog. He comes from the trenches. He comes from the struggle. And I love people that have harsh upbringings because it builds character. It shows that you can overcome adversity. Bryce Young has never had to overcome adversity at any point of his playing career up until this point. He was the best quarterback out of high school at Mater Dei. That was the best high school football team in all of the nation when he played. He went to Alabama, got coached by Nick Saban. There's never really been a lot of adversity that Bryce Young has had to overcome, which is why his confidence has been completely ruined. When you watch Bryce Young play, you're not seeing a player that's throwing the football with a high level of confidence in himself. You see somebody that's scared. You see somebody that second guesses himself. And the longer the Panthers continue to allow this dude to start, the worse he was going to get, because the more he continued to make mistakes, the less confidence he was going to have. And at this point, Bryce Young is worse than what he was last year, with the Panthers giving him a better supporting cast. And you can't lie and say that Bryce Young didn't deserve to get benched if you've watched the Panthers play these first 2 games of the season. Look, I was a huge Bryce Young defender. I've watched the majority of his games with the Panthers. But a lot of people in the national media got to stop making it seem like Bryce Young hasn't been given a better situation this year. And a lot of people in the media got to stop making it seem like they've watched the Carolina Panthers play. Because let's be honest, the Panthers are probably the last team that you're ever going to want to watch a game of. I'm not a fan of this team, but I've watched a good amount of them over the last 5 to 6 years, just because growing up in Florida, if the Jaguars weren't on TV, the 2 teams that I was always watching, because I didn't really have a lot of cable television, so I was watching games on the antenna. So if the Jaguars weren't on, I was either watching the Buccaneers or the Carolina Panthers. That's why I was such a big fan of Cam Newton. He's my favorite NFL player of all time. And I've never seen a Panthers quarterback play as bad as what I've seen out of Bryce Young. And, you know, over the course of this offseason, I've gone to war for Bryce Young. I went at it with my dude, Unk 2020, and he got mad at me. He currently got me blocked right now because, you know, I said that Bryce needed more time. And, you know, thinking back upon it, I understand why he was frustrated. Because, you know, if you really watch the Carolina Panthers play, you would know that Bryce Young isn't it. He has no awareness. He's running into offensive tackles. He can't throw in the middle of the field. Anytime Bryce Young has to throw in the middle of the field, something bad is destined to happen. The same interception that he threw against the Chargers last week was the same 2 interceptions that he threw in the New Orleans Saints. They all came in that same area of the field. Bryce Young just doesn't have the ability to see over his offensive line to the point where he can become an effective quarterback when you ask him to throw inside of the numbers. When Bryce Young was at his best at Alabama, there were a lot of plays that he made outside the pocket. When things broke down, he was able to make those big throws outside of the numbers. Same thing with Russell Wilson and some of the other smaller quarterbacks that you've seen play this game. The difference between Kyler Murray and Bryce Young is that although they both have the same size, Kyler Murray is one of the best athletes in the NFL. He has a strong arm, and he also has the ability to make guys miss, and he probably runs 4.4, 4.5. Bryce Young, when he was coming out of Alabama, was considered to be a point guard. He was supposed to be a smaller version of what Drew Brees was. He didn't have a great arm, but he threw with great anticipation, great accuracy, and he was great throwing on the run. Everything that made Bryce Young a great prospect out of Alabama, we haven't seen throughout his time being the Panthers quarterback. And if you're Dave Canales and you know that you have a owner that's very impatient and you have a locker room that's getting frustrated with bad quarterback play and you got fans who are booing the product that they're seeing on the field, you have no choice but to make this move. Even if David Tepper was the dude who decided to pull the plug on Bryce Young, it wasn't a bad decision because the Carolina Panthers, to be honest with you, are just downright unwatchable to play or unwatchable. You know, it's hard to watch a full 4 quarters of Carolina Panthers football. Watching the Carolina Panthers play is like pulling teeth. And I'm not trying to be dramatic when I say that. If you watch the Panthers play, you will understand what I'm talking about. It is torture to watch this team play for 60 minutes. You know, there are a lot of better things that you can do with your Sunday other than watching the Carolina Panthers play like dog crap week after week. Bryce Young, it's not all his fault why his career has gone the way that it has. But at the same time, what made him special at Bama, we haven't seen with the Panthers. And the more you continue to start him, the more you continue to sour the locker room. Adam Thielen, Deontay Johnson have kind of already started to turn on Bryce. And for guys like Shannon Sharp and Chad Ochocinco, if you were to play for a quarterback who was this bad, would you still be saying that Bryce Young never should have gotten benched? Would you still be saying that Bryce Young needed more time? It's easy to say this when you're on the outside looking in. But if you're a player, I would be going to Dave Canales and I would say, look, if you want to keep starting Bryce Young, just go ahead and trade me. Adam Thielen probably only has about a year or two left of playing in the NFL. You think that he wants to spend his final playing days not being able to get the football because Bryce Young is just completely inept at being able to throw it to him? Come on now. Let's be serious. If you have really watched the Carolina Panthers play, you will understand just how bad Bryce Young has been. And a lot of the issues that people keep trying to point out, oh, he has a bad offensive line, he has no receivers, it's BS. Xavier Legette was a first-round pick. They drafted Jatavian Sanders out of Texas. They traded for Deontay Johnson. They have a better supporting cast around Bryce Young than what people are giving them credit for because they're not watching the Carolina Panthers. And now thinking about it and listening to people in the media defend this decision saying that Bryce Young never should have gotten benched, I understand why my dude Unc 2020 was so frustrated with me. Because really, if you do watch Bryce Young play for the Panthers, there's no way you can justify him remaining the starter. There is no development with him. He was never going to get better. He was only going to get worse because the more he continued to play, the less confidence that he had in himself. At this point, it would be in Bryce's best decision and his organization's best decision, or best interest, excuse me, to just go ahead, bench him. And then even if Andy Dalton isn't that good, eventually if Bryce Young has to play again, maybe when he comes back out, he'll have more confidence in himself. You know, maybe he can look at himself in the mirror, reflect on what's going wrong, and make some changes that's needed. Because right now, this is not a dude who even looks good enough to be a backup. The problem with Bryce Young is that he already had to deal with the limitations of him being undersized. Now you put him on an organization where he has to deal with nothing but limitations. C.J. Stroud should have been the selection over Bryce Young when you think about it. Because C.J. Stroud was better equipped to handle the situation that the Carolina Panthers are. You can't say that no quarterback would have ever been able to succeed because of what has transpired with Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield and all of the other previous quarterbacks that have played for this organization. You see, when you have journeyman QBs like Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield, just because they're having success in different situations doesn't necessarily mean that the Panthers are all of the problem. You know, Baker Mayfield, if he is as good as what people are trying to make out and people are trying to make it seem like the Panthers were the reason why he struggled, why did the Cleveland Browns get rid of him? Sam Darnold has bounced around to a lot of teams over these last couple of years. He's a former top 10 pick. It has taken him his 8th year in the NFL to finally be in a halfway decent situation and to play some good football. You know, like, as bad as the owners what David Tepper is, Bryce Young isn't good. And even if you were to sit Bryce Young, there's still no guarantee that he still would have panned out. Trey Young sat a year behind Jimmy Garoppolo, and he still was a bust. I have a hard time understanding why Bryce Young has looked so bad when he looked so great at Alabama. And those Alabama teams were not as talented as what you people think. That kind of annoys me how y'all just think just because somebody played for Alabama, he just had a great situation. Bryce Young carried those Bama teams. When he left for the NFL, Nick Saban fired his entire coaching staff. You know why? Because he said we were too Bryce Young dependent. The Carolina Panthers, his rookie season, they ruined his confidence so bad to the point going in a year or two, you know, he just was doubting himself. He was second-guessing everything, and that's why he had to be benched in favor of Andy Dalton. You can't allow the rest of the team to suffer because of one dude. He can't even complete, you know, more than 50% of his passes. He can't even throw for more than 100 yards in a game. He can't diagnose the blitz. I understand why people feel the way they do about Bryce Young because they remember how good he was at Alabama. Alabama only lost when Bryce Young wasn't on the field. He was probably the best quarterback that Alabama ever had. But at the same time, though, it's hard to watch the Carolina Panthers play and not say that Bryce Young is part of the problem. This is a better team than what he had to work with last year. He had a head coach who was responsible for resurrecting Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield. And Dave Canales isn't obligated to give Bryce Young a lot of time to improve because this wasn't the quarterback who he drafted. Put yourself in his shoes. If you're Dave Canales and you know that you have a Looney Tune as a owner, you have a lunatic owner, are you going to wait 6 to 8 weeks for Bryce Young to figure it out and risk getting fired midway through the season? Or are you just going to go ahead, give up on him, and start Andy Dalton, who may give you a better chance to win? I would go with option 2. You don't have a lot of time in the NFL to figure it out anymore. I understand what Tom Brady was saying when these young quarterbacks need to sit. But at the end of the day, the NFL is a production-driven business. And if you don't produce, you don't have a lot of time to turn things around. Kenny Pickett got traded after 2 seasons with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers are one of the best-ran franchises in the NFL, and even Kenny Pickett was a bust with them. So if Kenny Pickett can be a bust on an organization as well-ran as what the Steelers are, so can any other quarterback in any other situation. Not every quarterback that gets drafted first overall deserves to be drafted that high. When you get drafted in a spot like that, you're not going into a great situation. You have to be able to overcome some kind of limitations, and Bryce Young couldn't do that. He was a smaller, more athletic version of what Tua Tagovailoa is. This was never the best situation for him. The best situation probably would have been going to the Houston Texans or going elsewhere to an organization that wasn't as dysfunctional as what the Panthers are. But the Panthers have always been dysfunctional ever since they pretty much came into the league, outside of making it to the Super Bowl a couple of times. Like, when you think of the Carolina Panthers, you think of Cam Newton. Cam Newton has been the heart and soul of this franchise. And now that he's gone, you can see how bad things have been ever since, because he truly was Superman to the Carolina Panthers. Cam Newton was a different kind of quarterback. We've never seen a quarterback that had the size that Cam had, nor the athleticism that he had. He carried Auburn in 1 season to a BCS national title. Everywhere Cam Newton has gone, he's won. And with the Carolina Panthers, you have the most physically gifted quarterback that ever played this game. So, of course, you were going to have your best years when Cam Newton was at the helm at quarterback. That's the kind of quarterback that Carolina needed to succeed with how dysfunctional this franchise has been over these last couple of years. Bryce Young isn't that. Frank Wright wanted C.J. Stroud for a reason. And yet, David Tepper overruled him and said, no, I don't care if you want C.J. Stroud. You're going to go ahead, you're going to draft Bryce Young, and you're going to find a way to make it work. There's a lot of reasons for why Bryce Young's career has turned out the way that it's been, but I feel this decision, the benching, was justified because he was not going to improve. And all he was going to do was further frustrate the receivers on the team. You can't say if you're Chad Ochocinco and you're Shannon Sharp that this was the wrong decision, when if this was you playing on the Carolina Panthers and you had to deal with this bad quarterback play, you would be singing a different tune. Chad Johnson played with Carson Palmer. Shannon Sharp played with numerous good quarterbacks. He was on numerous good teams. But if he had to play with a bad quarterback and he had to put up with this bad performance for 18 straight games, I promise you they wouldn't have the same attitude that they have right now. You know, Adam Thielen was frustrated. He threw his helmet on the sideline after one series last week. Deontay Johnson was ignoring Bryce Young when Bryce was trying to talk to him. This is a team that has turned on Bryce Young, not because he's a bad dude. He's a very likable guy. He always says the right thing at the podium. But at the same time, when you're not producing on the field, people's patience are going to run out with you. It's a team sport, but yet the quarterback position has the biggest impact on the wins and the losses. And if you have a great quarterback, he can win with not having it all. Patrick Mahomes won a Super Bowl despite not having a great group of wide receivers. And last year was the worst team that Kansas City ever had under the Mahomes, Andy Reid era. Great quarterbacks can win despite not having always great teams. Cam Newton took a Carolina Panthers team to the Super Bowl that had Ted Ginn as their best receiver. Come on now. Bryce Young was never meant to be put in a situation like this because he could never overcome it. You know, Bryce Young deserved to get benched. And I love Bryce Young. I want the brother to succeed. I still root for Bryce Young. But right now, he just isn't it. I don't know what's going wrong between him making the transition from college to the NFL. I never would have thought Bryce Young would have been this bad. This is one of the biggest surprises that I've ever had when it's come to evaluating quarterbacks. I wasn't surprised that Mac Jones and Zach Wilson didn't work out. Same thing with Trey Lance and Justin Fields, but I really expected Bryce Young to be special. I really did. But the Panthers just were a situation that Bryce wasn't cut out for. And this is the first time in his life where he's ever had to deal with some adversity when he's dominated at every level. High school, best player at his position coming out. You know, he won the Heisman at Alabama. C.J. Stroud was just wired differently, and I really believe if they drafted C.J. Stroud, they would be in a better spot than what they are right now with Bryce Young. But listen, man, there's no way you can watch Bryce Young play if you're actually watching the Carolina Panthers and say that he deserved to remain the starter, man, because it was hard to watch 3/4 of the Panthers play these past 2 weeks, man. And I'm not a Panthers fan, but I got a lot of respect for Carolina fans that tune in to watch this poor product week after week because it's just completely impossible to watch a full game of Carolina Panthers football. So I'm not about to believe that these people in the national media are quite informed with the situation that Bryce Young was in. The offensive line doesn't have anything to do with Bryce Young overthrowing wide open wide receivers. There were plenty of sacks that Bryce Young has taken that weren't on the offensive line. There was a play when he was getting outside the pocket. He held on to the football too long, and he got popped. He just has no awareness. If you watch Bryce play these past 2 weeks, there's no way you can say with a straight face that he should have remained the starter, especially with the frustration that was starting to boil over in this locker room when it came to him being the starter. He deserved to get benched.